Good morning, I'm Dr. Bond. Welcome to Bond Reports, and we were going to start today. I've been talking about theoretical roundsmanship up to this point, and the terms will get clear, but now we're going to say, well, how do you do this? We talked about Warren Spahn winning 363 games in the National League, and they say, Warren, how did you do that? You know, you've got not an overpowering pitch and not an overwhelming anything, and he said, hitting is timing, and pitching is destroying timing. And we're now going to see that as a group of early modest ploys, gambits, and stratagems, counters, they're used. Can you be more specific? And this is an introduction to basic roundsmanship. You're trying to take the junior faculty man out of his flow during a grand rounds. Ploy one, you're a resident man, and you're up on the podium in front, delay. They've got a fixed amount of time in that grand rounds, and don't be in a hurry. And also, the guy who's asking the question is feeling the pressure on his back. Somebody might call on him and ask him to clarify something, so he's out in the open too. So B, slow in your movements, slow in your answers as far as you can do without seeming actually deliberate or overly obtuse. And you can ask for further information, preferably marginally relevant, at best unobtainable, ideally something now unobtainable, which should have been obtained where the patient was seen and was not. In other words, you can criticize somebody else who's not on the podium for any reason at all, which does not have to be real or imaginary. Remembering this, also this is a thing to keep in mind all the time when you're on the podium. It needs to be remembered more than it does, the so-called Gestapo corollary, which is the key of roundsmanship. Simply put, the Gestapo corollary is you aren't in any trouble as long as you are the one asking the questions. That's the key. And it's from an old knock-knock joke. Knock-knock, who's there? Gestapo. Yeah, Gestapo who? Yeah, the last, the questions. This is the main thing you want to put yourself in the position of you are asking the questions. Always. And so you start to think of random things. What's the serum lead level? Thallium level, it doesn't matter. Does the patient have pain behind his eyes on urination? Silly historical things. Where were the birthmarks located? And this shades, of course. Now, mine's ophthalmologic. And so this shades, and of course, we're still real doctors, variation. And a personal favorite, what did the full neuro exam show? Because in the average bunch of ophthalmologists, lip service will normally have to be given to the whole patient concept. But I'll tell you, ophthalmologists did not become ophthalmologists to have non-surgical patients undress or relate long, pointless stories. And nobody felt for a hernia. You can be assured of that with it. So you want to have some of these flipped 50 or 60 so they're not too obvious, and you mix up the pattern of these time burner questions so they aren't too obvious. What was the thallium level? What was this? What was that? You're occupying time while the questioner is getting nervous. One of the ways you do that, always criticize the technical quality of an image, for instance, an X-ray, and ask to suggest that it be repeated. Perfect this dubious but dutiful error. You're asked to extract from this manifestly flawed and misleading data. For instance, you walk up to I'm going to use the example. What I've got in mind is a chest X-ray. You're shown an X-ray. What's that show? Well, you walk up to this thing, and first off, you go into simulated thought for 15 or 20 seconds, which in some kind of many contexts is just forever. And everybody's waiting, and then you say something crushingly obvious. Well, this left lung looks clear. This so-and-so, the heart might be this and that. You know, this isn't a very good technical film. This film's kind of technically poor. It doesn't have to be real, but you're occupying time and space where the guy asking you the question is getting nervous. Furthermore, this shades into ploy number 2. You have your obvious, simple differential, and it can be made to sound substantially more intelligent and thoughtful than it in fact is. So you highlight example, the meager things you do know. As an example, you're summoned to the window, told, what's the weather outside? Begin by talking about what it isn't. It's raining outside. You don't go out there and say, oh, gee, it's raining, because now the guy's going to ask you part of his other series of questions. Well, you start with a differential diagnosis. Well, it isn't sunny. And then, gee, if it were sunny, it would be blah, blah, blah. And you talk about what happens when it's sunny. That would be, well, you always want to think, I don't think it's hailing, though that would, of course, be unusual. You'd see several other signs, blah, blah, blah. You always have a tornado in the back of your mind, but this doesn't look like a typical presentation for a tornado. And a hurricane breath, I would show other signs, discuss this, discuss that, yada, yada, blah, blah, blah. Now, if you indeed don't know that it's raining, some guy, you're up there and they describe something, you don't know what it is, you have actually twisted this inquiry. So you're talking about what you do know, at least for a while. If you do know it's waiting, you've still lessened the time for junior faculty man to ask you another series of nasty questions that you won't know. He's going to take you as far as you go and try to go where you don't. So those stock phrases, you've been saying obvious stuff, can be taken for knowledge. Oh, this kid doesn't want to rush into what he's doing. A fairly well-known ploy. They're wise to it, but they're wise to it because they do it themselves. And it's a well-known, unobvious technique. Now, normal 3, the usual normal course of junior faculty man is to pose a series of questions which depend on sequence and timing for at least some of their effect. You're trying to take a guy, and so your idea here, break the flow. Don't plant your feet, lower your head, and get ready to stand and take it. So a concept to keep is when they used to do this in the NFL, the bump and run pass defense, at every snap, whoever's going to be the receiver gets a hard forearm right up the side of the helmet, right at the line as every play begins, before he even starts to run his pattern. It's mindless, basic, and it's done because it was done. They outlawed it, but it's done because it works. You're trying to take a guy out of his timing. That's the whole thing. When you respond to a question, an early, just small ploy, don't ever give a round number. Well, gee, what would be, and apropos of nothing, you say, well, I understand 61% of the cases do this, 27%. There was a series where 43%. Now do that slowly. And the guys sometimes give the junior faculty man a little time to sometimes visibly startle. In fact, you can almost watch a guy asking questions go through all 5 of the Kubler-Ross stages as you're taking him out of his timing, and all of a sudden he's getting ready to ask you the question, what he thinks the answer is going to go, and you've taken him out of his timing and made him think. Now the second thing, 61%, he doesn't like the sound of that round number. He'll automatically assume that you've seen that somewhere, and therefore you've been doing some reading in the literature, but he hasn't seen that particular number. So you've read an article that he hasn't read, that as he gets himself advanced on here, maybe you're going to trap him with. And he has no way of knowing that, and you know that he hasn't read that number because you're just making it up out of whole cloth, hopefully very plausibly. And you can watch a guy. I've done this. He'll have his mouth a little open. He's drawing his breath in to ask the next question, and he'll kind of shut his mouth and contemplate his next move there for a moment. You've taken him out of his timing. He's having to think. His eyes will narrow a little as he's assessing this new development. So he can't say what he planned to take. He's formulating a new one, and he doesn't like his quick ones as much as he liked the one he usually uses. And there is a temptation on the part of the guy when you do that to elaborate. And you got to fight that temptation. Brevity is the soul of wit, some Shakespeare in the morning, and the soul of first-class lying is brevity. Tell your lie and shut up. Don't keep talking. But you're now holding more of the cards, and the important thing is to remember this is not street basketball, this is poker. Don't overplay your hand. You're holding low cards, you're running a bluff because the guy can come in and clobber you. You're basically running a poker bluff. Sit still, be quiet. The temptation is there. But if you get a guy where he shut his mouth and he's getting ready for his next thing, and he probably doesn't want to fool with you anymore, take the money and run. You're mixing a metaphor. Well, you say take the money and run, you're sitting down. But a lot of people can certainly strut sitting down. A lot of them are President Grand Rounds type events. You know them, you've seen them, and you watched them in action at Grand Rounds. Junior faculty man will stand there, assess the significance of this new development, and you may have a second stage of this. But now he's walking through more of a minefield than he thought he was. This is getting distressing. I'm going to get clobbered. This is taking too much time. Where I'm out in the open, and this guy's going to zing me on something. going on to you go on to the next person. That is all you're really looking for. You're not looking to kill this guy. You're just trying to bump him a little, like that of NFL things. Now, junior faculty man can try to counter that, a few gambits of his own. They're about laughably easy to counter. For instance, 61%. Where did you see that? Now, the obvious counter, in a tone slightly mystified that he hasn't seen that himself, well, you don't remember exactly. You do your general reading. You're a monk-like existence. You live out in there doing your general reading at the end of your 110-hour week. And you don't remember where you saw that. Everybody will buy that. It doesn't matter, and this guy knows that. Your actual reading consists slowly of video games instructions and AI-produced filler in between pornographic videos, and he probably knows that, but he won't be able to corner you. How do you remember that? Go metaphysical. How do you remember anything? You just remember it. The chief is back in there, alpha predator, saying, why are you picking on this kid? He'll feel the force of that scowl. He'd rather go somewhere else, and he will go somewhere else. Now, as a good rule, where did you see that? Just in general, it is a good thing in general never to call journals by their titles or real names, offhand names. Oh, the Blue Journal, the Tan Journal. Refer to a publication, not usually called by initials, by its initials. Do something suggesting all kinds of familiarity with literature that you don't in fact have. The key article was written by, the usual group on the East Coast, the same authors who did that last article on this, and say that it was a very good survey article. You'll make sure everybody gets a copy. No one's ever put out with you when that doesn't happen. The statement's a safe statement. No one's expecting that. No one's ever done that. I've heard that in my own life hundreds of times. Of course, I'll still respect you. I'll see you sometime soon. It's been a wonderful time. The things people routinely lie about. No one's expecting that to be anything. Use those and similar methods. And if the elephant's starting to look at you a little bit, alter your plans. Change it. The little big man gambit is to try to really make yourself small, if at all possible, invisible. That doesn't work at the podium very well. It works sometimes if you're in the audience. And it's like the man said, the little chief and the little big man, well, sometimes the magic works, sometimes it doesn't. But it never works if you don't do it. Now, the elephant will really, if he's after you, it's bad. He'll call your bluff. He'll demand a straight answer, but he's not looking over his shoulder. He doesn't think it's taken too much time. And in those cases, you do the armadillo defense and realize, roll yourself into a ball and wait for them to stop kicking you. You lost and they got you, and that didn't go your way. You can lose battles and win wars. Make it rather distasteful and even harrowing, strong word, for a junior faculty man. He'll be less inclined to cross swords with you when there's a lot of easy stuff all the time. You don't need to win all the battles to lose the war. And I've used that round number ploy as a small example. There will be many to follow. And it's meant to be a little preliminary, a little early jab to keep somebody on their toes, a flow breaker, and to get them out of their flow and into a less comfortable area. I will relate an incident using that ploy. An earnest young physician, I could name, good guy, we had a thing in those days of buying a formal excimer laser to use for the new LASIK, and I said I sometimes tell patients that they're 17 times more likely to have vision-threatening complications with their contact lenses than they are with LASIK. Now, that actually turns out to be kind of true. And some research I did, in fact, my name's on an article with that, as a junior author with Dr. Frank Price, who did the heavy lifting of this, in fact, did that, but that turns out to, in fact, be true. It's plausible sounding, but I'm giving an exact number, and that plausible sounding thing, this one does happen to be true, but I didn't know that at the time. So he hailed this information with much more enthusiasm than I thought he would. He said he's going to start telling his patients that, where did I get that information from? Now, the thing about being a real roundsman is you don't reveal your sources, you don't back off. You have professional omerta, the silence of mafia types, and it would have been so easy to do the right thing and, be a mafioso on that. But it pains me to admit that in a highly characteristic and most unroundsman-like pang of what I suppose is a vestigial conscience, I confessed to him that I just made that up on the spot, which was true. Now, I hail it here to just tell people how far I've come in my roundsmanship studies. Even amateur magicians know that you don't ever reveal your secrets to the rubes. And so I've suffered this great shame till now in silence when I'm outing myself. But I offer this unseemly episode of momentary weakness, a grim reminder that even the best of us have lapses. So I'm in hopes my fellow roundsmen may profit from my example and take added resolve to get their own consciences under control before disaster like this overtakes them. And I would say this roundsmanship statement: the true roundsman never lets his conscience stop him from doing the right thing. Always do the right thing. Natural selection is operating on junior faculty man, and he's doing that. I wasn't proud of what I'd learned about that, but never doubted it was worth knowing. In stages, we're going to walk through roundsmanship. We're going to show you how this is done. This will be done in further bond reports. Thank you for listening. Tell your friends.